Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for being with us. We're here for a three-part series where we reflect on our caregiving experience during the pandemic. And today we're going to have two panelists join us, and then we're also going to engage our attendees who are here live in a conversation. And then over the next 2 days, we're going to have three more panelists, and then we're going to pull it all together and talk about what are the themes that happened. You probably can guess. And then we'll talk about what are the solutions, because we know that we are moving into more difficult times again. So what can we do now that might be able to help with solutions? So let me introduce you to the panelists who are joining me today. So Barbara Corley is here. Barbara is a certified caregiving consultant. She is the owner of Corley Caregiver Consulting, and she helps her husband and her sister. And she's been a caregiver really for her entire life. So Barbara, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Denise, for the opportunity.
And Cameron Huddleston is joining us as well. She is the author of Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk. She's a personal finance journalist. She also is an expert with Careful, which is an app that helps you manage your parents' money. And she cared for her mom, who had Alzheimer's and died during the pandemic. She died in January. Am I correct, Cameron?
You are correct, yes.
And Cameron, we're going to get to you in just a minute because you have a story of what it was like during those last 3 months of your mom's life that really, I think, speak to the challenge of the pandemic. Okay, so Barbara, let's start with you. So when you think about what was going on for you during the pandemic, what was the big worry for you when the pandemic started? Oh, did I lose Barbara? I think she froze. Did she freeze for you guys?
Yes.
Okay. So Cameron, let's move to you. So what was the worry for you when the pandemic started?
My mother, who had Alzheimer's disease, was in a memory care facility. And my fear was about her getting sick. I mean, every time you listen to the radio, turn on the news, they were talking about the large number of residents in skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities that were catching COVID. And I was terrified that my mom would be part of those statistics. I was also worried once they shut down her facility to visitors that I wasn't going to be able to connect with my mom in any sort of meaningful way because she was in the late stage of Alzheimer's disease. I couldn't just pick up the phone and call her and say, "Hey, Mom, how are you doing?" because she wasn't capable of having a conversation. I mean, I could ask someone on staff to use their phone and do a FaceTime call, but really, in order for me to have any sort of interaction with my mom, that required being there, holding her hand, putting my arm on her back to let her know that I was actually there. And so those were the things that I was worried about, my not being able to connect with my mom and then my mom getting COVID-19.
Okay, so hold that thought. So Barbara, for you, what was the worry for you when the pandemic started? I think there we go.
You might know I'm having some glitchy internet all of a sudden. I have a sister who is about roughly 4 years younger than me. She is developmentally disabled and physically challenged. She lives with my parents. So we were very concerned about her. She has a very limited bubble normally just to try and keep her healthy. And so we had concerns about overall immune system. My husband is a military veteran, so he is a cancer survivor. So that's been 10 years, of course, but we were concerned about suppressant, issues and that kind of thing. So ours was a mental shift into basically prevention. Tighten down the bubble, keep the bubble small. Our focus was always on my sister, but my parents are in the 70s and keep her healthy. And I said, Mom, we all have to stay healthy. She could be the healthiest one of all of us, because the virus was just so unpredictable, our bubble down, to keep everybody as safe as possible.
You know, Barbara, I'm going to ask you to stop your video because that might help with your audio.
Okay. Let's try that.
So, yeah. So Cameron, unfortunately, your worry came true. So at the end of 2020, your mom has a diagnosis of cancer. She's admitted into hospice. She's still living in the facility. And then she's diagnosed with COVID.
Yes. So my mom, like I said, she had Alzheimer's disease. That's why she was in a memory care facility. In 2019, we find out she has cancer. She had surgery to remove a growth. In 2020, in June, we discovered it had come back. And that was a whole set of challenges trying to deal with that in the middle of a pandemic. We did go back to the hospital, but really treatment was not an option. Chemotherapy and radiation were not an option for my mom in her late stage of Alzheimer's. So I had signed her up for hospice care, and a nurse was coming in and checking on her regularly in her facility. And then in December, so that was, the summer of 2020, in December, cases started popping up at my mom's facility, first among staff. And then we started to get emails that residents were testing positive. And every week we were getting those emails. And I was just like, oh my gosh, please don't let it be my mom. Please don't let it be my mom. On January 8th, she got her first vaccination. And I thought, this is it. We have made it. My mom has gotten her first vaccination. She didn't get COVID. We're in the clear. And at that point too, I mean, it was January 6th, actually. So 2 days before she got her vaccination, I had been communicating with her facility and hospice because my mother was at the point that she was needing to go into the hospice facility. She had not been eating or drinking anything for about 2 weeks. And so it was time to move her into hospice for end of life care. That was the conversation on January 6th. January 8th, she got vaccinated. On January 11th, it was a Monday, I got a call from my mom's facility, and they told me she had tested positive for COVID-19. And I already knew the facility's policy. If a resident tested positive, they could not remain there. They had to quarantine elsewhere. Because I knew this, I had already been planning for this possibility, hoping that I would never have to put my plan in action, but planning. And unfortunately, she couldn't go into the hospice facility because they were not allowing COVID positive patients. So what that meant is that afternoon, I brought my mother into my house for her final week of life and cared for her while she had COVID-19. Um, and to say that it was challenging, it would be an understatement. I thought, like I said, I had a plan. Hospice brought in a bed. Um, the nurses were still able to visit, but I was so woefully unprepared for having to step into that role of caring for my mom as she was dying of a very contagious disease. And so that just complicated things so much more.
And I want to mention that you actually have 3 young children and a spouse. So you were managing your mom's care in a part of the house that separated you from the household.
Yes. So when we got the call, we scrambled to, my house is a 2-story home. I have a main level and then a basement level that's doesn't really feel like a basement level because we live on a bluff, and so most of it is still exposed, and my daughters had their bedrooms on that level. I feel fortunate because we had a screened-in porch that we had converted into a sunroom, and it had its own heating and cooling system. So the plan was to have my mom in there, and there are windows and the inside of the house that you can see, into the sunroom. And I was in my daughter's room, which had a glass door because, once it was a screen-in porch, so I could see her. I could see her through the glass windows in our TV room so that I could be constantly keeping an eye on her, but limiting my exposure. Yes, though, but I kicked my daughters out of their room. They were on the main level of the house. We sealed off the door on the stairway to, I mean, really, I was doing the best I could, and my husband was doing the best he could to keep us isolated to prevent the spread of the disease. I mean, I was getting meals through a window. My husband would bring me my meals, and it was every time I would go in to care for my mom, I would suit up with all the gear, the plastic gown, two masks, an N95 mask, a disposable mask, one of those face shields, plastic gloves. I would go in, I would care for her, I would with her, and then I would leave and I would take everything off and I would throw away everything that could be thrown away. Um, and did this for a week, and then had to continue quarantining for another 2 weeks after my mother's death. And so, like I said, it just added this additional layer of complexity to an already very difficult situation.
Something, Barbara, that I want to ask you about that Cameron talked about was planning. So I did some planning with my parents. They were a bit aghast that I was trying to be prepared in case they had COVID. I was going to take care of them at home, and I had bought supplies, which still stay in a closet. But I wondered, Barbara, what kind of plans did you have for just in case?
Honestly, we tend to be planners by nature. We had just finished estate planning, as luck would have it. It did right before COVID started. It did prompt the discussion and the action of guardianship, which we are in the process of completing. I'll be honest, in retrospect, we I don't know that we really did plan, to be honest. We just, it would probably have been a very spontaneous um, action at that point. Had something occurred, because our whole focus was just on staying healthy and limiting our exposures.
And Cameron, I just want to let you know that there's a comment in the chat room for you from Wendy. She writes, "Wow, it's amazing how quickly we can learn to adapt when facing such a crisis. What a great example you are to your children." There's so many parts of your story, Cameron, that are heartbreaking. And I think about after your mom's death that you had to remain quarantined for 2 weeks. So at a time when we think about being connected to those who love us because we're grieving, you had to stay disconnected to keep them safe. What were those 2 weeks like for you?
Well, I did have my sister with me for one day. We both live in Kentucky. We live in different cities though, and she came and was with me for the final, I guess, 36 hours of our mother's life. I was at a point where I could not do it on my own, and she was willing to put herself at risk too to help, because at that point I was giving my mom morphine every hour on the hour around the clock, and just I had not been sleeping, and she was there to help support me. And so she remained a day after my mother's death as we wrote the obituary together, and then she went back home and was able to quarantine safely there. um, this might sound slightly strange, but it was, in a way, a bit of a blessing to be on my own for that period, because I had so much I was trying to process: the grief of the loss of my mom, uh, really the trauma of watching my mother die. And I can tell you that movies and TV do not prepare us at all. They make you think it's very peaceful, and people just simply close their eyes and take a last breath, and that's not the way it is at all. And I don't want to be too graphic here. But watching that was incredibly painful, and like I said, it was very traumatic. And I think also I was flooded with all these emotions of the 12 years that I was caring for my mom. It was a very long journey, her Alzheimer's, and I think a lot of those emotions that I had kept repressed just so I could get through things suddenly flooded to the surface. And those 2 weeks alone without having to tend to my children's needs and tend to my husband's needs, that helped me in a way. But it was hard to be alone. I feel very fortunate, though, that I had plenty of friends and family who were calling and checking in on me. And even though I couldn't be in the same room with my family, we have a deck on the back of our house where my husband would sit and we would open the window, and it was January and we were freezing, and I had a coat on and he had a coat on, and we would keep our mask on and talk through a window, and my kids would do the same, and I had to FaceTime with my kids. And so I was able to remain connected in that way. Certainly, it would have been nicer to be able to hug my children and to hug my husband. But as I said, being able to be alone, I feel like helped me with get through the grieving process. I mean, I continue to grieve, but it would allowed me just to kind of have that time to myself to process what had happened.
There is something around the relief of not having to explain why you need quiet time. That you
I
just,
agree.
yeah, that you just need a few moments to yourself. There is a blessing in that, that you could just take that time without having to explain it or feel guilty for taking the time.
I agree. Yes.
Barbara, I'm curious, when you hear Cameron talk about an unexpected blessing that occurred, I'm curious if there was one for you.
Through all of last year, I could actually say we had many. I was furloughed from my corporate position at the beginning of April. It was then extended to the end of August. So it was a family-owned company up until a few years ago, and I had worked there for over 20 years. And so when the second extension of the furlough came, I was forming my plan B, let's just say, because I wasn't confident that I would be actually asked to return. In the end, I was one of 10 people that were asked to return, but I chose to go with my plan B. And during my furlough, I used the time to become a certified caregiver consultant and launched my own consulting business. During that time, my husband and I then decided to move in the middle of the pandemic from the city to the country. It was a stressful year in many ways, but it was one of the most life-changing and positive years that we've ever had. And I can't believe where we ended up. I honestly can't. I'm blessed to say we all stayed healthy, even amongst all of the moving and everything else. Yeah, it just offered so many changes that I never would have saw coming. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do talk about the difficult changes and that we are a resilient group and that we can find positive changes. I'm curious, Cameron, and then I'll throw this question to you, Barbara. When you read about coverage of the pandemic, and there might be coverage of caregiving during the pandemic, I'm curious if you see anything that's missing in the coverage.
I I think what breaks my heart is thinking about, and you read the articles about people who, when they have COVID and they're in the hospital and they are isolated and not able to have family members there at their side while they are struggling with the disease, not able to have family members at their side when they die. And that breaks my heart. But I wish that I wish there was more emphasis placed on that, because I want people to be aware of how awful this disease really is. I know, you know, I'm in a part of the country where I feel like a lot of people are still taking it very lightly. The numbers are going up, and there are reports about hospitals filling up again and a lack of beds and ICU units. I mean, I have a cousin who's just lost both of his in-laws to COVID. And I just think of all those people out there who, if their family members are ending up in the hospital, I don't know what the policies are now, but I know earlier on you couldn't be there with your family, and that's horrible. And I knew that going in with my mother. I wasn't about to. There was a nursing home nearby that was accepting COVID positive patients. I wasn't about to send her there. I didn't want to take her to a hospital and never see her again. I wanted to be there with her. I mean, it was hard, but I wanted to be there. And I think that there should be more of a focus on that. The tragedy of dying alone with this illness, because it is a tragedy. People shouldn't have to die that way. People shouldn't have to die from this disease that we now have a vaccine against, but people shouldn't have to die alone. I would like to see more written on that.
Yeah, and I think what you alluded to earlier, which was your mom's death wasn't like a movie set. And then thinking about what your mom experienced and that you were there as a comforting presence. And then to know that others were having a similar experience without a comforting presence. It's very difficult to bear that, to think that that was an experience that people had.
Exactly. And even though my mother no longer recognized me as her daughter, I would like to think that I would like to believe that she could at least feel my presence and my sister's presence and know that there were people there who loved her very much, people who were at her side so that she wasn't alone. I really can't imagine a more awful way to go than to be entirely alone.
Barbara, I'm going to throw that question about the media to you in just a minute, but I actually have a follow-up question for Cameron that just
Mhm.
occurred to me. And that is, so here you are on the hour dispensing morphine to your mom. I'm curious, who was guiding you with how and when and what as you were caring for your mom during that last week?
I got a little bit of guidance from the hospice nurses who were coming in. There was a nurse who came regularly in the morning, and she would help me, change my mom's briefs. Not that there was much to change at that point because she wasn't eating or drinking. Hospice took care of ordering the medication. She was the one who told me how often to give it. And initially, it was every 3 or 4 hours, I was told to give my mom medication. But then, when the evening nurse showed up, and the evening nurses would alternate between whoever was on call in the evening, um, I remember feeling, I guess, like I was doing things wrong because the nurse looks at me and she's like, "Your mother she's suffering. How often are you giving her this morphine?" And I said, "Well, I was told to give her to her every 3 to 4 hours." She said, "Well, you should be giving it to her every hour at this point." And I felt terrible. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm doing it wrong. I'm letting my mom suffer. And I don't want my mom to suffer." But I was told every 3 or 4 hours. And so I only had really, a few minutes with the nurse, and then the nurses had to go and tend to other patients. And so it was, here's the medicine, here's how to do it, here's kind of what to look out for. But for the most part, I was just winging it, and I was hoping that I was doing the right thing and keeping my mom as comfortable as possible. But it was really scary. There was one when my sister arrived that evening. I was trying to adjust my mom because she had been lying on the same side for a while, and I wanted to adjust her into a slightly different position. And when I did, she just started coughing and gasping for air. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've just made things worse for my mother. And it was so difficult for me. And my sister's like, no, 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 you haven't done anything wrong. It's okay. This is just what's happening. This is what's going on. But I had a lot of self-doubt during the whole process because I wasn't entirely sure what to do, and the support that I got was limited.
How did you transport your mom from the facility to your home?
That was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. Obviously, I picked her up in my car. My mother was not wearing a mask. And so I had on a mask. I should have had on a double mask at that point, but I just put a single one on at the time. And then I couldn't get anyone in my family to help get her into the house because they couldn't be exposed to her. And so I had to get her out of the car and through the garage and through another room to get her into the bed. And even though she had really kind of wasted away to her, like what was a shell of her former self, she was not very compliant. She didn't know what was going on. I had my arms around her, under her arms. Essentially, I was kind of dragging her under the arms into the house, and she was not happy about it. And I was like, Mom, I'm just trying to help you. And then I was able to get her in the bed, but I could not even get her coat off because she wasn't willing to work with me. I mean, she didn't know what was going on and she was very weak. And so I got one sleeve off. And then when the nurse came over that night, she helped me get the other sleeve off and we helped get her changed for the night. But it was terrible. I mean, I thought, Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you. I've just got to get you inside and get you into this bed safely. But I was surprised at how much my tiny mother weighed and how difficult it was, and thinking, how are people doing this? How would an 80-year-old woman be caring for her 85-year-old husband who weighs so much more than her? I was just grateful that at least I am relatively young and healthy and capable, but it was still a challenge.
Yeah, I am always looking at vehicles to see if I can get my mom in a car. There's only certain types of cars that she can get into. And I think about trying to get a mom with a week left of life into the right type of car during COVID. And
Minivan. I do have a minivan.
but that didn't, it wasn't an ambulance, right? I mean, it
No,
wasn't
it was
like
not an
it
ambulance.
wasn't an ambulance and you didn't have a staff of EMTs
No,
helping you out. Oh
no.
my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, those are, I think, the experiences that are so important to talk about, because if you haven't cared for someone, you don't know what that experience is like. Just those kinds of logistics. Because you just think, oh, she got her mom into a car. Yeah, yeah. Did you have a wheelchair that you then used?
So and this was my fault too, because hospice had provided a wheelchair. They provided the bed and a wheelchair, but I didn't think to have the wheelchair ready. And I didn't want to leave my mom in the car because I didn't know what would happen and run in and get it and bring it out. And as I was trying to get her in, I'm thinking, why didn't I have that wheelchair ready to get her into the wheelchair? So we had one, but I didn't think to use it, in part because just I was just rushing to get there and get her and to bring her back. Um, and if she had been her normal self, if she had not been, you know, suffering from cancer and having not eaten or not have had anything to drink, and it was her normal self, even getting her into the car would have been a challenge because she would fight that tooth and nail. It would take two or three of the aides at her facility to get her into my car whenever I had to take her to doctor's appointments. I mean, it was incredible how she would have so much strength when, normally she was so complacent and easygoing, but if you tried to make her do something she didn't want to do, oh my gosh, she would get so mad, and this superhuman strength would come out of nowhere, and boy, she would fight us off trying to get into the car.
So here's a part of the story that makes me so mad that, I mean, all of us here today understand what that transportation logistic is like, but we're not the only people in the world. So there's staff at the facility that have already experienced what it's like to actually try to have your mom go into a car. And it infuriates me that between hospice and the facility, there was not support for you that said, okay, let's just think through this. Let's just take 5 minutes to think through this so you have everything you need so that you can quickly and easily get your mom into your van and then from the van to where she's going to be. It really only needed to be 5 minutes, and it could have changed that experience for you.
Yes, it would have been wonderful if the hospice nurse was waiting at my house there to help me. But I also understand too that, you know, they have a limited number of people on their staff to help out, and they have other people there helping. I do think hospice did what it could to help me, and I'm very grateful for the service that hospice was able to provide. I just wish it could have been more. I wish I could have been able to take her to the facility so that she could have gotten professional care in that final week. And still frustrated, that they wouldn't allow her in because she had COVID.
Yeah, that's the other part that's just infuriating. That someone really and truly at the very end of life, that there couldn't have been accommodations for an infectious disease. Because we have managed infectious diseases before. I appreciate it's a novel, it was new, but there are protocols that could have been in place that could have helped. And that, especially in January. Had it been like end of March 2020, okay, totally get it. But we're talking about January, middle of January 2021. Okay. Barbara, I'm just curious, when you hear Cameron talk about her experiences, what comes to mind for you?
I mean, I honestly just see, uh, the little challenges that we had were minor in comparison to that. I mean, that's the story that I think, and I struggle with this as well. And I know I'm among kindred spirits here. I think if you've not cared for someone who either at all or who has an underlying condition, you don't stop to realize how others can affect you. One of our biggest struggles was, having we had one particular family member who just did not respect the fact that if you're coming to our house, you will wear a mask. He thought it was complete hoax. All of this was, and I'm like, okay, if you bring this to us, you're not going to feel a thing. You're going to go on about your business. And that's the frustrating part. I think until you're either personally touched by this or you have cared for someone, you get the severity of it or the potential. I mean, Cameron lived through the severity of it. We did our best to prevent the severity of it. And I think that's just what's so frustrating to me, how one person can affect other people. And I don't know. I have friends that I just have to hold my tongue around because we're not of the same belief system. And I know that they won't understand it, sadly, until it affects them directly. But I believe the media needs to focus more on stories like Cameron. I mean, that's the truth. Like she said, death is not, Hollywood glamorizes it. People have been so buffered from it until they're directly affected. Um, it's frustrating. It's so sad because it didn't have to happen like that.
And I think for whatever reason, we have put this message out into the world that we're too weak to know the truth. So death is glamorized because we're too weak to talk about death. But the problem is then when death happens, we're just completely thrown off because we think the movie version is the real version.
Yeah.
And we have to live in the truth, and we are strong enough to know the truth. We are strong enough to know the reality of life and death. And that's how we manage it well, when we know what the reality is. So I'm curious, Barbara, as you think about we're coming up into the fall and the winter, and of course, there's a spike in cases. I'm curious if there's anything that you're doing now that will help you in the fall and winter based on what you know now.
I think we've really not changed, even when the mask, I mean, I'm in Ohio, even when the mask mandates were dropped, I was the only one wearing a mask in public. I just was not ready. If I felt like if people could feel free enough not to wear them, I could feel free enough to continue to wear mine. So I really don't see our routine changing at all in terms of protective masking and what have you, and social distancing and just limiting our exposure to the public. We do consider, like, my sister requires a lot of supplies. So we're we make sure to keep those on hand should we run into supply chain issues. Because you're starting to hear a little bit about those here and there. I do that here at home. I'm the person that goes out. I'm the one constant for both my husband and I and my family that goes out into the public to get things and bring them in. We limit our exposure in that regard. So we're not stockpiling toilet paper or anything of that nature, but we are concerned about keeping staples in the house just in case, it won't go to waste, but preparing just in case.
And I'm going to just ask our audience, our attendees who are here with us live, if they have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat room. Or if you have any experiences you'd like to share, feel free to type in the chat room. Yeah, I think, Barbara, you talked about how individuals can impact so many. And I think about Cameron's situation when it's staff members bringing in COVID to the facility. This was January before the vaccines. I know that facilities are doing everything they can, but it's still difficult. And I wondered, Cameron, so I have been expressing my anger around your experience, and you have been so gracious as you've described what has happened. I'm wondering if there's anything that makes you mad when you think about it, and if there's any way you've been able to manage any kind of anger that you've had about your situation.
I'm definitely angry about a lot of it. After my mom died and I went to the grocery store, or I went out into public and saw people not wearing masks when there was still a mask mandate, I was furious. Right? I wanted to stop those people in their tracks and say, my mom just died from this disease, and you could be the reason because you're not wearing a mask, and maybe you're hanging out with someone who was hanging out with someone who was hanging out with the staff member at my mom's facility. So every time I would see people with not wearing a mask, I was so angry at them. I was angry that, like you said, it didn't have to end this way. It didn't have to. I wanted to be in a hospice facility with my mom at ease, knowing that she was getting professional care in those final days. I didn't want to be wearing a mask. I didn't want to be limiting my interaction with her to a few minutes because I was afraid that I would get sick, and I couldn't risk getting sick because I have 3 kids. I'm a mother to 3 children, and I didn't want to end up in a hospital dying alone of COVID. I mean, and you never know. I mean, I'm healthy. I don't have underlying conditions, but I could still just as easily get sick and end up in a hospital as the next person. I mean, I'm vaccinated now, but I'm frustrated about hearing about the still very high percentage of people who aren't vaccinated, people who still aren't taking it seriously, and they're going to end up in situations like I did, where they're losing a family member, and maybe they won't be able to be with that family member in the hospital. I don't know what hospitals' policies are anymore. I don't know if they're letting family members be there, but so much of this I feel like is preventable. And so yes, I'm angry, but I've had to just let it go. And my husband's like, well, whatever, don't worry about them. They're not being careful, it's on them. And so that's true, but it's not just on them, because if you're spreading it, and I've heard recently a report about how there's still a high percentage of workers in long-term care facilities that aren't vaccinated. So if they're not wearing a mask and they're not vaccinated, even if the residents are vaccinated, they can still get the disease. And that's not okay with me. It's not going to be okay with their families. And I hate that that's happening. I hate that we are in this situation.
So if anybody's had a recent hospitalization experience, please feel free to share in the chat room. My mom went to the emergency room about 3 weeks ago. She had a heart attack. She fell at 10 o'clock at night. I went to the apartment because my dad called me. We couldn't get her up. We took her to the emergency room, which was a surprise that she consented to do it, because she always says no. I mean, I have cleaned up blood and gore in their apartment after she's fallen, and she'll say no. But this time she was like, take me. So When we got to the emergency room, when I got to the emergency room, they had already done an EKG and it indicated that she was having a heart attack. And then we had to make a decision about angioplasty. And that was at 11 o'clock at night. The cardiologist is saying, do you want this? I don't know. And so I said, then I'm having a conversation with my mom about her death. And the cardiologist came back and said, what do you think? And we asked more questions. And then finally at midnight, we talked to my dad. He wanted to call the doctor. I thought, what doctor is going to take our call at midnight? But we did. Had a run around because we couldn't reach the doctor. And instead, I decided to call one of my brothers. And so the cardiologist came back in for the third time, waiting for our answer. So we had a conversation with my brother. And I didn't ask him if I woke him up. I just said, Keith, Mom's in the hospital. She had a heart attack. They want us to make a decision about angioplasty. Here's the cardiologist. And so I had the cardiologist on, my brother on speakerphone while the cardiologist explained what would happen. We asked follow-up questions. There were some things about my mom's particular situation that it just seemed stupid to have her go through an angioplasty. So we said no. That was at midnight. My mom is starting to sleep. We're waiting for a room because they've told us that she will be admitted until another physician comes in at 1 a.m. and says, oh, since you've refused medication and treatment, we're going to send your mom home. And my mom, who does not like hospitals, says, you can't send me home. And I say, I don't know how I'm going to get her in the car. So Cameron, that's why I was thinking about you, because I was just like, how am I going to get her in the car, my car? And then how am I going to get her up into the apartment? I said to the doctor, my mom's a fall risk if she goes home. Okay, all right. So they did keep her until Monday morning. And I stayed in the little cubby in the emergency room as long as I could, but at 3:30, usually I can power through, but by 3:30, I was like, I'm either gonna fall off the chair or vomit or both. So I think I should just go. And of course, 10 minutes later after I left is when they moved my mom to a room. But it's so interesting to me, these experiences in the healthcare system, because it never seems like it's better. Like it never seems to it doesn't ever seem like it improves, or there's a easier system for a family. Like you're sitting in this emergency room cubby on this uncomfortable chair while my mom's in a gurney, and it's just people coming in and leaving. And at one point I did go out to the nurse's desk. This was probably about 2 a.m. to check to see if my mom had been assigned at a room. And the nurse was just irritated by me to no end and told me I had to go back into the cubby or else. And I was like, okay, I will go back into the cubby because I'm afraid of the or else. I just don't know why it's not an easier situation, but it's never gotten easier. It's never gotten easier. And we know with COVID, it actually has gotten harder. But during my mom's hospitalization, my sister was the one that went, and I don't know about limits on visitors. I was recovering from my all-nighter as an older person. It's not as quick as it used to be.
I would say, though, that my mom's experience in the hospital when we had to go back because her cancer had returned, the staff at the hospital were incredible, and they were a huge advocate for my mom because she was not supposed to return to her facility. She was supposed to quarantine for 10 days outside of the facility. And I was like, I can't take her. I can't care for her. And I had found there was like a continuum of care place that was willing to take her in. They have assisted living, independent living, skilled nursing care, and they were willing to take her in for 10 days as long as she had tested negative. But the doctor was like, no, she needs to go back to her facility because it's familiar to her. The case manager was like, no, she needs to go back to her facility. So they got on the phone with the facility director and they said, you have to let this woman return to the facility. Do not send her elsewhere. And they agreed to take her back. And so I'm so grateful that they were willing to advocate for my mom. That was great. And that hospital, my mom had been there several times, and just a wonderful, wonderful hospital in general. Always got great care there. And so that was the bright spot in this situation, that her doctor was wonderful. case manager, and they were making sure that she was going to go back to a place where she was familiar with her surroundings and she wasn't forced into another temporary facility so she could quarantine.
Okay, so, somehow I think we've lost that we're talking about people that have lived a long life, that are loved and have family members and deserve home, whatever that home is. So I'll ask you, Barbara, when and where have you experienced humanity in a way that gave you hope during the pandemic? And fingers crossed that you have a story.
I do actually. Obviously, because we are still in the pandemic. I mentioned that last year we moved to the country. My husband has almost 24 years in the military. So if you're familiar with anything in the military, when they do things, they do them full on. So he's paying the price for jumping out of airplanes and such over time. So he's got some physical limitations, progressive pain issues, chronic pain, that type of thing. So his ability to do certain things out here in the country is limited. We were actually something so simple. We were gifted a couple trees worth of firewood. All we had to do was go get them. And so I'm not one that likes to ask for help. But in this certain case, I needed it. And so I put out a Mayday on Facebook, and I had 6 people show up at our house a few days later who spent hours in the heat cutting and splitting firewood for us, because otherwise we wouldn't have had it. And when I saw people coming forth on Facebook, stepping up, absolutely, I'll help you. I'd be happy to. When do you want me to be there? I literally sat down and cried. Because I guess I was hopeful, I was cautiously optimistic, but I was prepared just in case there was a no, like, okay, what's my plan B? And, I've just seen people's utter respect for how seriously we were taking the pandemic. That was a beautiful thing to me as well, because people stepped up, and whether or not they agreed or not, they would wear their mask. And it's like, I mean, I may not agree with it, but I'm respectful of people's right to make their own decisions. But our decision was inconveniencing them, and it was nice to see the tables turn and have them, respect our decision as well. So I've definitely seen, and that's just a couple that come to mind, but yeah, I'm a firm believer in humanity. So I know there's more, there just aren't coming to mind at the moment.
We have just a couple minutes left, and Cameron, I know that you have to leave in just a couple minutes, but I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your mom. What do you want us to know about who your mom is and was?
She was a very kind, creative, and fun person. My mom had told me several times before she developed Alzheimer's disease that what she wanted, what her final wishes were. She wanted to be cremated, and she wanted a service where friends would tell stories about her. And so we did that. We had a service in May outside. And because she loved gardens, we had it at a botanical garden, and she loved flowers, and she was always picking flowers and arranging flowers and working in her garden and painting flowers because she was so good at painting and drawing and so creative. But friend after friend got up and talked about how fun my mom always was. And I knew that she was fun, but I knew her as a mom, not as a friend. And I just loved hearing those stories about all those kind of silly, crazy things that she did. And I got to learn about a side of her that I wasn't quite aware of. But she was always there for me growing up. She was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was an attorney, and so she was there with us. She helped me with all of my school projects. I drove me to all my after-school activities, made my prom dresses for me because she was so talented at sewing. And I remember that watching as I had my my daughters were 4 and 2 when she was diagnosed, and she had helped me with my first daughter's room and like creating curtains and that sort of thing. And then when my second daughter came along, she was helping, but it became more difficult for her. She couldn't follow patterns as well. She couldn't measure, so she never was able to make any dresses for them. She wasn't able to sit down and do crafts for them, and that was really hard. You know, they missed out on a wonderful grandmother. And by the time my son came along, she was, you know, well into the moderate middle stage of Alzheimer's, and he never even knew her as the person she was, only as the grandmother with Alzheimer's disease. But she was a wonderful person, and my kids were really robbed of a wonderful grandmother.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile that unfairness. It strikes me, Cameron, that you are surely her light. I mean, I think about what you're wearing today, and that is a flowery, colorful shirt. And in many ways, you reflect her.
And yes, trying to be cheerful because she always was. She was
Oh.
always positive.
What's your mom's first name?
So her name is Mary, but she went by Winky.
Oh, fun. Oh gosh, that's awesome. Okay. Oh, I love that. Well, we're going to remember Winky when we have fun and when we enjoy flowers and when we smell the fragrance of flowers. We'll have a good memory of Winky. Okay, thank you guys so much. Cameron and Barbara, thank you guys so much for sharing honestly about your experiences. We're going to meet again tomorrow, same time, same Zoom link, and we're going to have 3 more panelists, Sharon, Mark, and Rachel, and they're going to talk about their experiences. And then the third day, we're going to pull it all together and think about basically what's our blueprint to make this an easier, better experience. Hopefully, right? That's the goal. Okay, thanks everybody so much for being here. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.